tools are great ways of making interesting discoveries by looking at lots of data. In fact, sometimes they can be quite amusing, but sometimes they actually involve using cell phones. In fact, here's one that involves texting on one's cell phone. And we'll see how relative frequency allow us to understand exactly what's going on. Let's check it out. So 32 students were polled about whether or not they have a phone plan with texting capabilities or whether or not they've had an accident. This is kind of scary, of course. And sometimes actually looking at statistics allows us to understand how to live safer lives. And that's, of course, the power of math. So here's the question. Is there an association between having a phone with texting and having an accident? Well, here's the data. So take it out. We could see people who've had an accident, and it's broken down by phone plan with texting, phone plan without texting, no accident, and then the total number of people. And you see the total of everybody is 32. So 32 people were surveyed. And just to make sure we understand what this says that, for example, there are 12 people that have a phone plan with texting that had an accident. Yet there were 8 people that have a phone plan with texting with no accident, and there's a total of 20 people that have a phone plan with texting and so forth. Okay, so how do we determine if there's an association between having a phone plan with texting capabilities and having an accident? We want to see if these things are somehow connected or correlated. Well, the way to start, of course, is to first find the relative frequency of having an accident. So now how do you find that? Well, that's going to be a ratio, of course. All these relative frequencies are always ratios by definition. And in this case, it's exactly what the issue is. We look at the total who've had an accident, and we look at the ratio between that with the total number of students polled. So the totality of the entire population, which we happen to know is 32, and then the total number of students that have had an accident altogether. So here we go. If we compute this for ourselves, we see this equals, well, total number of students who've had an accident, well, that's the accident element, and we want the total, so that's going to be 16. And we divide that by the total number of students polled, which is the total of the totals, which in fact is 32. And so what is 16 divided by 32? Well, that's, of course, a half. If I write that as a percent, that would be 50%. So what that means is 50% of all of those students that were polled, in fact, have had an accident. So that's what we learned. Now, we want to now compare that to the issue of the phone with texting capabilities. So now we want to take a look at finding the relative frequency of having an accident among those who have a phone plan with texting capabilities. So now the ratio we need to look at is precisely this one. We first take a look at the total number of students that have a phone plan with texting capabilities and who had an accident. And we compare that to the total number who've had an accident. Well, the total number who've had an accident we've already seen is 16, so that's really easy. So the total number that have had an accident we saw is 16. And out of that, how many of those actually have a phone plan with texting? And we see the answer is 12. Phone plan with texting and having an accident is 12. So here we see this relative frequency is 12 over 16, which simplifies to 3/4, which as a percent is 75%. Now, 75% is larger than this 50%. And so what that tells us is, in fact, that there is, in fact, an association. Or in other words, what we conclude is that the relative frequencies show that having an accident is more likely for those who have a phone plan with texting than for those who have a phone plan without texting. And you can see that because we see 75 is a lot bigger than 50. So there's a great way to kind of compare by looking at the relative frequencies. Let's try another one just for fun together and see if we could have more fun. So here we see data from 100 middle school and high school students. And here's what we've got. Students were asked whether or not they had visited at least one amusement park. So the question is there an association between being a high school student and visiting an amusement park? Well, it's the same type of question. Let's check out the data. So we have middle school students, high school students, and we total all of them. Visited the park, so 20 students are middle school students and visited the park. did not visit the park. So for example, 15 students are high school students and did not visit the park, and then the total for each of those, which you see is 100 down here, and we can see the total for how many visited the park and how many didn't visit the park and so forth. Well, how do we answer this riddle? Well, the first thing we do, as before, is we find, in this case, the relative frequency of having visited an amusement park. And that means we first start off by looking at the ratio of the number who have visited an amusement park to the total number of students polled. So, this relative frequency is easy to figure out, because what we do here is we see, okay, how many is the total that have visited an amusement park? Well, visited amusement park, 20 middle school, 20 middle school, 60 high school, total is 80. So we see 80. And the total number of students polled is the total of the total, which is 100. And so we see 80 over 100, which is 80%. So 80% of all the students polled have, in fact, visited an amusement park. What we want to see is if there's an association with being a high school student. So that is, do high school students tend to actually go to amusement parks more or less than the middle school students? That's kind of what we're looking for. So what will we do next? Well, next we find the relative frequency of having visited an amusement park among all those who are high school students. And so here is now the ratio we want to look at. The number of high school students who visited an amusement park to the total number of high school students polled. So now we're just looking with respect to the universe of high school students. And so within the universe of high school students, let's see. Well, how many high school students visited the amusement park? Well, the answer is 60. And how many high school students were polled total? Well, we see 75. So we have 60 over 75, which works out to be 80%. So now we see the percentages, in fact, are the same. And so what we conclude here is that in this example, in fact, there is no association. What that means is that high school students are no more likely to have visited an amusement park than students in general. So we can see that by taking a look at the relative frequencies of the various ratios, we're actually able to extract information when there is an association or when there isn't. Associations are very important connections that tell us that there, in fact, is some underlying structure between what looks like masses and masses of data. Have fun looking for the underlying structure in your life. I'll see you soon.
Okay, that concludes additional examples for section 15.1 to help you understand relative frequency.